The Green Knight. The Green Knight just came out, and I'm a really big fan of the poem, the 14th century poem uh, that is commonly known as Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. There's even some debate about the pronouncing of the name. Some say it's Gawain with an accent on the towards the end, and some say Gawain with a hard G in the front. I've been a big fan since a kid of actually the story of the Green Knight, and I had really high hopes for this film. So as you can probably already going to tell, my review of it and my thoughts on it are, somewhat less than favorable. But before I get to that, I do want to say about some things that I did like about the film. So let's get to some of the positives first. One, the film is immaculately photographed, right? It's immaculately shot. And you can tell that a lot of time went into the cinematography. A lot of thought went into the set design and the aesthetic of the film, without a doubt. And so it looks great. It just, you can't say anything about it, right? Definitely give it an A plus in terms of the way that it was shot. Or actually on second thought, I might give it like an A minus, right? In terms of just pure cinematography, I think it's an A plus. There were times where I felt that the camera, instead of being merely a tool in the storytelling craft, became a little too intrusive, right? There at one point, like there was a scene where the camera is kind of like spinning around. And the question is like, really, to what effect? And in fact, that might be central kind of to my critique of the movie, would be to what purpose and effect are you, right? Are you doing these things? So I definitely like that. I also really enjoyed the soundtrack, the kind of, I don't know, somewhat traditional sounding instruments from the aisle. So I enjoyed the soundtrack, and I thought it was shot very well. I know that I know that there was some praise for the acting in the movie. And I feel quite often in movies that actors get a bad rap, in that they say, oh, the acting was horrible, or the acting was this and that, without enough attention paid to, I think, one, the writing, and the editing. So it's my understanding that the film was, I guess in its first finished iteration, Lowry was not happy with it. The director didn't like it. And so because of COVID-19 and some other delays, like went back and did some further edits to the film. So what we are seeing is actually, from my understanding, a kind of revision. So what is it that I didn't like? Okay, I come from, I have a degree in English literature. I come from a person that has great love of prose and of writing. And I would definitely say one of the areas that it falls flat is that I understand wanting to take creative license, but I felt in this way it was almost too much, and that it really departed from some central aspects of what the poem was. Now, that isn't to say that there hasn't been a debate over, I guess, the centuries, particularly since I think since the 1800s is when the poem really kind of emerged into the public sphere, where it became popular. And so people have spent a lot of time, questioning, debating about, what is the meaning of it, and that there's undoubted an element of satire, and the author, whoever he or she, most likely he, whoever he was, clearly had a sense of humor. But I think it goes without saying that the poem is didactic in that it wants to teach a lesson, right? So the character of Gawain, right, is this young and yet unproven knight, meaning he hasn't like proven anything through great deeds, and yet he's known, though, however, to be a person of virtue. So when the Green Knight shows up and they have their contest, the beheading contest, right, and then has to go face him, and then on the way to go meet the Green Knight at the chapel, he has to go through a number of different challenges, and these are mainly in the area of virtue. And so it seems pretty clear that the poem is trying to teach and showcase Christian virtue, godly virtue. And so the tests that Gawain has to go through are mainly those not of a warrior or a knight in that he's going to fight somebody, right? It's mainly through these other types of challenges, moral challenges, particularly the two main ones: pride / vanity, and then of course temptation of earthly desires. And so it's an unapologetically romantic, chivalrous poem. The character is chivalrous; he does chivalrous things. And so I really kind of wonder, where the director and the writers, like, what were they thinking of trying to do with this? Because the character they portray, who's played by Dev Patel, he seems to be fairly unvirtuous. And I know that is one take on it, but it really goes against the poem, right? I mean, Gawain, his symbol, right, which is this kind of continuous 5-pointed star, right, before people flip out about the occult and whatnot. In this particular drawing is that it's an unbroken design, right, meaning that like his virtue is unbreakable and this idea. So the character is unapologetically virtuous, and then of course has that virtue, put to the test. And so I really feel like, did they read this poem? Did they really read it? Or did they just simply choose to take the rough idea out of it and discard really the poem and just use it as as kind of almost like a blank canvas, then to write upon it whatever they will? Because there were some really important elements that were left out, like Morgan Le Fay, who is the enchantress, who actually creates the magic that transforms the Lord Bertilac into the Green Knight, right? She's given like, you don't even know who she is in the film, like, and so one of my things with this film, I actually noticed while I was watching it. About 2/3 of the way through the film, there was I think a Korean couple sitting next to me. They actually got up and walked out, because if you don't know anything about this and you're just going on the title, Sir and Green Knight, you think, okay, this is a movie about, I don't know, King Arthur or knights or something like that. And then you show up and it's this kind of like weird, bizarre art house film that is not even sticking to the script of the poem, and then just goes off and does all these other weird things. And so I could see with them, I could see almost a kind of frustration with them and fidgeting while they were watching the film. And then about 2/3 of the way through, they just got up and walked out. They're like, I don't know what this is. Matter of fact, and I'll get to this in a second. They walked out at the end where in the poem, there's this thing where Gawain goes to the castle of the Lord Bertilac and his lady. And the Lord goes hunting, and he says, whatever I catch, I will give you, and whatever you catch, you give me. And, Gawain is like, well, what am I going to catch in a castle? So, of course, right, he goes through this temptation by the Lord's wife, who tries to seduce him, and he resists and rebuffs her temptations, only accepting a kiss. And so in the poem, Lord Bertilac and Sir Gawain exchange a kiss. When they saw of course, the super duper homosexual kiss on screen, they're like, okay, we're out. Like, we're done. And so I feel like, the writing and the directing didn't take into account that, hey, what if somebody doesn't know what this poem is? How will we make this world of Arthurian legend and whatnot, how will we introduce that to an audience that doesn't know what that is? I think they did a very poor job of that. Again, the film looked really good, but it seems like that's about all. Like, they put so much effort into the costumes and the cinematography that there wasn't enough to, well, how are we going to introduce you into this world? Two, I was a little bit puzzled by some of the casting. I mean, Patel is Indian. And of course, this is an unapologetically, European, British Isles, maybe even Welsh, right, story. And so there was a couple instances. Well, one, of course, King Arthur's sister. I mean, the guy that plays King Arthur looks like a British dude and was a British guy, right? But then his sister is also of Indian persuasion. And that wasn't explained why. And then there was a couple other scenes where there would just be like, there was like a black or an African woman there. Like, what would that person be doing in, I don't know, presumably pre-modern Britain? Like, what are they doing there, right? And so was this one of those, like, we're going to be kind of woke and hip and have this, like, interracial casting just to make a kind of point, right? To make an ideological point versus storytelling. Like, I as an African American, I actually don't mind that everybody in that movie would have been British or white or whatever you want to call it, because that's what makes sense historically. And that I understand you want to reinterpret the story, maybe in a modern sense, but it still has to. If you were going to do that, it would have to then require some additional explanation, just versus throwing these non-white faces and bodies in there and be like, okay, right? It just didn't, I don't know. I found that to be puzzling. I found also the pacing of the movie in the beginning was somewhat interesting, of course, with, the dramatic entrance of the Green Knight. And then the movie really misses a golden opportunity to tell us, like, well, who is Gawain? The character of Gawain is basically reduced to this coward and to a drunkard. And even if those were his qualities or characteristics, they did a very poor job of showing us either how or why, or I don't know. It's just like, he was just this craven coward that lets a whole year go by, waiting for this, this appointed time that he has to go and meet his doom. And so he goes and, he goes on this, supposed to be a 6-day journey, right, to go to the Green Chapel. And the poem describes him encountering many different fables. So, okay, fine. They interpreted that as that he encountered giants. That's no problem. But then why were they giant, naked women, right? And this is where I've said before about this preoccupation with the vulgar, right? I mean, why would there just be topless giants who are women? It just didn't, like, what purpose did that serve? It didn't seem to serve any purpose in the film whatsoever. And so essentially the big middle chunk of the film didn't really seem to serve any good purpose when he meets Winifred. Also, just like adding things that are really not in the poem, taking excessive creative license, and then not explaining it, and to the point where it really feels like, you're like kind of looking at your watch, like, okay, like, are we going to move into something here? Because this is starting to really drag on. And then ultimately, as the film ends, where he finally meets, right? He finally meets the Green Knight. What was really disappointing is that, of course, in the poem, it is revealed at the very end that the Green Knight is actually the lord of the castle that he stayed at, Lord Bertilac, and that he was transformed into the Green Knight by the magic of Morgan Le Fay, right? The legendary sorceress from the Arthurian legend, right? Well, that's not explained at all. And in the poem, it's true. When Gawain shows up to finally meet his doom with the knight, when the knight first goes to strike him on the neck, he flinches, right? And that's when he says, "Well, hey, are you, why are you flinching? Because I didn't flinch when you gave me my blow." And that's when he has to face up to the fact that, okay, yes, he was being cowardly. And then, the green sash that he got from the lady, who again was enchanted by Morgan Le Fay to protect him, right, from any earthly harm. And that's when he gets hit a second time. And then the knight says to him, like, "Hey, it seems like you've got a problem with, facing death. So what kind of knight are you that cannot face death? And indeed, what kind of believer, right, from the Christian point of view or from the Muslim point of view, like what kind of believer are you that you cannot face the test of death, And so he keeps the green sash, at least in the poem, right? He keeps the sash as a token to remind him of his shame, of his pride and his vanity and his cowardice, right? None of those elements are touched upon in the movie. Right? They're either not touched upon or they're not explained. And so the film just kind of ends abruptly. And I found that was really, really disappointing. And so in the end, the Green Knight is really just this kind of like, he's just like a monster that doesn't really serve any purpose. Whereas in the poem, he's a person that's putting Gawain to the test, to test his virtue and to also teach him some important lessons. And so I feel like those are some things where the film really fell short on. Now, that could be, of course, I try not to read too much into it. Reading the director's biography, identifies as an atheist. Maybe for somebody like that, reading a poem that is unapologetically religious and about religious virtues is like, I'm going to throw all of that out and I'm going to make it this existentialist thing. Matter of fact, there's a line at the very end of the movie where, the Green Knight is about to lop off his head. And, Gawain is like, is this all that there is? So it's like injecting this, existentialism that, is not in the poem. Maybe I'm sort of unapologetically, a textual purist, right? And taking creative license is one thing, but I really feel like just making up your own thing and then just merely taking the veneer of the poem, to me, that's just, not simply only dishonest, but just kind of, it's intellectually and creatively lazy. And it shows a kind of, I don't know, for me, I felt like there was like an agenda. I mean, and so to go back to the moment where the couple left, right? I mean, this is the assumption now today that men cannot be friends, men cannot express love to one another without it always having to be homoerotic in some way, right? So in the poem, which is written unapologetically from a normative Christian point of view, there's nothing homosexual or homoerotic about the poem, right? That's people reading that into something because apparently if two men express their love for one another or even indeed kiss each other, right? I deal with people from different parts of the world where when men greet each other, they give each other a kiss. There's nothing homoerotic about two men exchanging a kiss. So in the book, in the poem, right, that's all that it says is that Sir Gawain and Lord Bertilac, right, in this gifting thing, right? They exchange a kiss. Nowhere is it that they exchange a kiss passionately, full on the lips, and hold it. It's like disgusting, And so, like, what? It's like this whole moment that we live in is so completely decadent, so completely pregnant, and just like a deluge of everything to do with LGBTQ in the agenda, that you take one of the great classic poems of the Romantic period, right? One of the great English poems, undoubtedly, it's had great longevity. It's a really fast. It's actually not long. I recommend. James Ryan Richard Tolkien, I think that's what the JRR stands for, right? So Tolkien, did a translation of his own of The Green Knight some years ago. And of course, this is one of those little tiny books, and I think it's all, I don't know, probably about 150, 170 pages, subtracting, right, the introduction. And so, it's really cool to read. I also have an interest in the poem because there has been some, let's say, academic speculation about, either who and what does the Green Knight, the character, the Green Knight, right? Who or what does he symbolize? And maybe where was he taken? Now, of course, some say that he's taken from even earlier Celtic legend or poems. But there's one academic, Alice Lassiter, actually has written that he may have been taken from the figure known as Al-Khidr, right? That we know, for instance, from Surah Al-Kahf, who, of course, the word Al-Khidr, right, in the Arabic means the green one. And it is somewhat similar, right, where Musa, alayhi salam, Moses, right, goes on this journey, right, who's sent upon a journey, encounters this, I guess you could say, for lack of a better word, a mystical figure that bewilders him and does things that he doesn't understand, and is a kind of a challenge, right? I told you would not be able to be patient with me with these things that I'm doing, right? So it's interesting, right? It could be a stretch, but it is nonetheless. Of course, that would have perhaps been a time in which, and it wouldn't be the first time, that Christian writing was heavily influenced from things coming from the Muslim world. Actually, one of the things that it reminded me the most of, it's true, I mean, it does bear some resemblance to that story from the 18th chapter of the Quran, but also in the attempted seduction of Gawain by the Lord's wife. Actually, that reminded me of Yusuf, alayhi salam, of Joseph, and the attempted seduction of Joseph, right, by the Pharaoh's wife. And so, I would also see that as another potential, influence. Of course, that story is not unique only to Islam, right? So that's found, throughout the Abrahamic branches of their different religions. So I would say, it's certainly possible that it may have had some influence, at least in that character, right, from the Muslim world, from Islam. So I've always been a really big fan of the book. I think it's great, or rather the poem, right? I say book, but it's really a poem. It's humorous to read. It's funny, and it actually in some ways reminds me of in our own tradition, right? In Islam, you have. You take, for instance, the Risala of Ibn Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani. Of course, it's not quite the same, but many of the great poets, Ajrumiya, right? Many of the great scholars would write poems for people because it was easy to memorize and it's somewhat entertaining. And so why would they do that? They would write it to teach a moral lesson or to teach Arabic or whatever it was, but putting it in the poetic form. And so I have appreciation for it on that level as well. So unfortunately, the movie just didn't really, the movie just didn't really deliver on, it didn't really deliver on the poem in my opinion. So I cannot really recommend going and sitting in the theater for as long as I did, and also with just some of the kind of grotesque vulgarities that were, to be quite honest, a little bit of a surprise. Although I guess maybe I should have known better, given who and with what we deal with today. So it was too bad. I was kind of excited to see a new modern. I as a kid, I remember watching the really low budget. What was it? Sword of the Valiant with Miles O'Keefe, who did a bunch of like really horrible, action B movies. But it had. Oh my God, his name is the guy from James Bond, Sean Connery, right? So Sean Connery plays the Green Knight, which actually, to be quite honest, the whole movie was horrible, right? It was such a, it's almost so bad it's good. It's like one of those, one of those movies that you pan, but it's Mystery Science Theater 3000 type of, good, bad. But the casting of Sean Connery, right, who even at that age, right, he was still, pretty buff and good shape, right? And so, the Green Knight is actually unlike this film that really, again, just portrays him as like this kind of monster, right? The poem describes him as a mountain of a man. Like he's like so big, he's thought to almost be a half giant because he's like a head or so taller and bigger than everybody else there. And he's got this huge barrel chest and he's super, muscular. He's like really built, but he's still though described as being like really handsome. He's very good looking. He wasn't a monster, right? He was just this super big monstrous guy who happened to be green. And so I also felt like that was, not only an unfortunate departure from the poem, but done in a way that, why? Like, why is he a monster? Like, what purpose does it serve? It certainly didn't feel dreadful. So anyway, I was hoping that it would have been better than what it was. Given it, when I saw some of the previews and I saw some of the stills, I said, well, it looks good. It's a little bizarre. They got a Daisy guy playing Sir Gawain, but let's let's see how this thing goes. But unfortunately, aside from some really great cinematography and some interesting soundtrack, it really falls short. Only further demonstrating that the pen is indeed mightier than the sword. Stick to the book. So, inshallah, I hope you enjoyed this. I may do a few other movie reviews. I've had people ask some thoughts on movies that I see. So I may from time to time do a review here or there. And of course, salawatullah ala nabiyil kareem. May Allah bless our beloved Prophet Muhammad and his family and righteous companions. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum.